In this lesson, we're going to learn how to manage lights in our scene. Alright, so we've gone through and we've learned how to create this level, and now what we want to do is we want to start working with the lighting a little bit. This is kind of toward the middle of your project where you're finalizing the levels and getting the look, and you'll want to start tweaking how it looks overall. So whenever we are talking about lighting, there are several ways of creating lights. Normally you'll create lights as a game object, and so you'll see that in your game object you have lights, and then you have multiple types of lights. So you have a directional light, which is more like the sun. You have a point light, which is kind of like a light bulb. A spotlight, which is like a spotlight. And then we have an area light, which allows us to take a light from like a window or something like that. Then you'll see that we have reflection probes and then light probes. These are useful whenever we are trying to create reflections on dynamic objects in our scene, as well as lighting on dynamic objects whenever we're using baked lighting. Okay, so in our scene we already have a directional light. It's put in there by default, and you'll find it here at around 0, 0. And whenever you select it, you'll see that we have several different options. The first thing that we have is to be able to change the type of the light itself. So right now it's set to directional. You can switch it over to spotlight or whichever you like, but we're going to keep it as directional. The baking itself, you get to set that. Right now it's set to real time. So we have real-time lighting on this, and what that means is it's dynamic lighting. So all of our dynamic objects, like our player running around, is going to be able to cast a shadow. We can switch this over to baked lighting if we want, and if we bake this lighting, what it will do is it will bake the lighting information into the textures of our objects, and then our dynamic objects, like our player character, will not cast a shadow, okay, based on this. Now, we could also set this to a mixed if we wanted to do that. And what that's going to do is it's going to, the light is going to stay stationary. It's going to bake the static information in, but on dynamic objects it's going to keep that as kind of real time. It's a little less expensive. Real time is really expensive, okay, or the most expensive of these, and then baked obviously is the least expensive, okay, on memory. However, real time works very well. Okay, we can adjust our color of our lights. So if we wanted to make this a little bit more red in color, we could do so. So we could kind of draw that down a little bit, and then we could start to kind of play around with some of these colors. If you wanted to go really crazy, you could do something like purple or whichever, but we're going to stay with something a little bit more natural. So kind of an orangish color. Keep it kind of light. I'm not going to go too far from where we were because it was really good to begin with. So we have something like that. You can adjust the intensity, which is basically the strength of the light. It really offsets the exposure and makes it really bright if you go more than one. One is usually pretty good. And then we have bounce intensity. So if we have light bouncing, it's going to render that effectively. Okay, usually 1 is a good value to stay with. It's nice and inexpensive. The shadow types this light is going to cast is going to be a soft shadow. You can set it to hard shadows if you want, but that doesn't look very natural. And then you have the strength of your shadows. So if we wanted to, we could start to dial those down, and you'll see that those shadows become much lighter. And this is a great way of kind of playing with the overall color of the shadows if you don't want to deal with the bounce lighting and things like that. Okay, but usually 1 is pretty good with this real-time baking on. Quality settings. We're going to use the quality settings that are set up. We're not going to talk about those because that gets beyond the scope of this course. But if you wanted your shadows to be high quality, you could set high resolution. You'll get a little bit of a softer edge on those shadows, but I'm going to go ahead and just use the quality settings to keep things nice and smooth. Let's see, we have cookies. So lights can use textures to project an image or to project a shape from that light. That's what a cookie is. Okay, I'm just going to leave the rest of these so you can kind of experiment with those. But those are the basic parameters that you'll need to know whenever you're working with lights inside of Unity. Now, the lights themselves can be manipulated. So with a directional light, it doesn't really matter where it's positioned. The only thing that matters is its rotation. So the rotation is going to determine where the sun is coming from. So as you can see, as we start to get toward more of a 90-degree angle, it becomes more of like a sunset. And we start to cast some really long shadows. It's pretty interesting. Now as we go toward more noon, you can see that it becomes a little bit brighter, and it's taking more of that sky color and putting that onto your objects. Okay, and then we can go to the other side and we start to get a sunset. Now you'll also notice that there's a sun disk that is applied to that as well, okay, which is pretty cool. So go ahead and get the angle that you would like for your game. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this. I'm kind of thinking about the start position for the player to be like right around in here or so. And so I'm just kind of thinking about how the player is going to see the level itself. So we can cast shadows this way, but I really want them to be able to see the lighted side of the rocks, and then the shadows kind of casting down onto the paths that way. Okay, so think about your presentation. So this is pretty good. All right, so there are other types of lights that we can use as well. So if we wanted to use a different type of light, you can bring those into the scene very easily. You can do that here in the hierarchy as well. Right click or left click on Create, go to Light and Point Light. And a point light, let's go ahead and bring it into position here. A point light is a light that casts a spherical shape. Let me go ahead and reset its position. It casts a spherical shape much like a light bulb, and it works pretty much like the directional light. So we can change its color, we can change its intensity. You can see that that's starting to light up there. And you could even change the radius in which it shines, okay, so which is its range. Okay, but you'll see with this, we really don't get a whole lot of options compared to the directional light. So as of right now, you can see this little warning that says currently real-time indirect bounce light shadowing for a spot or point light is not supported. Okay, so these lights will do better if they are baked, okay, or if they are mixed. Okay, so whichever you want to do. Most of the time, point lights are going to be baked in that. They're very inexpensive and easy to use. So we have our range. If we adjust that, you'll see that the light goes out further. So the intensity of the light is at 1 at the very center, and then it falls off to the outside of the edge of that range to 0. The color, here's the intensity, the bounce intensity, and then you can also set up your shadows. So pretty straightforward with those lights there. Now we're not going to need any of those lights. We don't even need a spotlight, but I do want to show you how they work. And then we'll do one more light. We'll use the spotlight here. So the spotlight is very much the same. Let me go ahead and reset it so I can get this into position quicker. So we have this spotlight here, and we can move it. We could even rotate it around. The point light, there's really no reason to rotate it because it's in a spherical direction anyway. But you see what we get here. If I take my spotlight angle up, you'll see that it begins to spread out that cone, and then the range is going to lengthen in which the rays can be shot out from the source itself. So very much the same. You'll see that same warning. Let's switch this over to baked. You might even switch it over to mixed. Usually whenever I see spotlights in games, they're going to be baked in, but they also need to be able to cast shadows from dynamic objects. Okay, and so we would want that to be in our game as well. Okay, so mixed is probably going to be something that you'll use quite a bit with spotlights, but not all the time. Okay, and so you can see that the options and parameters here are the same as the point light, except for the cookies. Okay, cookies are best used on spotlights and directional lights. All right, so now that we've talked about those different types of lights, those are the three major ones that you will use in most of your projects. Let's go ahead and move on into our next lesson, and we're going to start talking about using particles, because I want to create kind of this sandy particle system that's kind of blowing dust across it as we're playing the game. And we'll get into that next.